Hi everyone in Algebra 2B. This is going to be your new material in lesson 96. In the comment section of this video, you're going to put all of your questions for lesson 96A. So a few things that we're going to go over is that I'm going to go over your ratios for directly and indirectly or inversely. So this is how we solve if we're doing directly. This is how we solve if we're doing indirectly or inversely. So notice the left side stays the same, but the right side is what changes. So if it's directly, it stays the same as the A1 over A2, so B1 over B2. If it's inversely, that second fraction just flips and becomes B2 over B1. What we are going to be doing is we're going to be doing varies jointly and then direct and indirect. So varies jointly would mean that we have a second term that's going to be attached to your B1. So it would be B1C1 over B2C2. So that would be varies jointly and varies directly. So we're just combining those by multiplication. But there also will be cases where it's going to be direct and indirect. So let's say it says directly to C1, so that would be C1 over C2, but indirectly to B2, so then we would flip the second one. So notice how it's similar to the first one, but in that the second one is actually flipping. The B1 is actually becoming B2 on the top and B1 in the denominator. So what you need to be pretty comfortable with is knowing what directly and then indirectly what those fractions look like. Now we're going to go through the examples that are in the book, and then we're going to do some problems from the lesson. So 96.1, it says the number of girls varied inversely as the number of boys and directly as the number of teachers. Well, I'm going to just take this step by step. So this is 96.1. I'm starting with the girls varied. So this would be G1 over G2. Your left side never changes. But then it says that it varies inversely as the number of boys. Well, inversely, I would use this equation. So that would be B2 over B1. And then it says, and directly as the number of teachers. Well, directly would be B1 over B2. So teachers would be T1 over T2. Okay, so it said inversely to boys and then directly as teachers. So I'm using both the directly and the inversely or indirectly. And now I'm just going to fill in the variables that they give us. It says that when there are 50 girls, there are 20 teachers and 10 boys, which means that G1 is going to be 50. And then this is the tricky part. So it says there were 20 teachers, so T1 would be 20. And B1 is going to be 10. Now we are solving for how many boys were there when there were 10 girls and 100 teachers. All right, so we're solving for the number of boys when there were 10 girls. So G2 would be 10. And then our teacher 2 would be 100. Okay, so now we're going to cross multiply. I have 20 times 10, which is going to be 200. X equals, and then I have 50 times 10 times 100. It's all going to be divided by 200. So now I'm just going to evaluate. So that'd be 50 times 10 times 100, all divided by 200. And that would give me 250 boys. So really what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at both of these things. We're looking at directly and indirectly or inversely. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to take a look at number 96.2. So this one says strawberries vary jointly as plums and tomatoes. So this one's very jointly, which means that we're going to use this equation right here, varies jointly. And the things that are going to vary jointly for 96.2 is going to be that strawberries, so strawberries, S1 over S2, that doesn't change, varies jointly as plums and tomatoes. So that means I have plums and tomatoes, and then plums 2, tomato 2. So varies jointly would just be varies directly, but a combination, meaning that we multiply the plums and the tomatoes. So then we're going to plug in our numbers. So it says 500 strawberries went with 4 plums and 25 tomatoes. So 500 strawberries went with 4 plums and 25 tomatoes. And it says how many plums would go with 40 strawberries. So S2 would be 40. We're solving for the number of plums and 2 tomatoes. So now we're going to cross multiply. I have 500 times 2, which would be 1,000, equals 40 times 4 times 25. So I'm going to divide both sides by 1,000. And you would end up with 40 times 4 times 25 would give us 4,000 divided by 1,000 would be 4 plums. And that would be your answer. Now the second half of lesson 96 is really similar to what we were doing before, but in this case now we are going to have irrational roots as our answers. So we're going to go over those problems together. We're going to do numbers 1, 2, 6, and 7. I want you to pause this video now, and I want you to attempt those 4 problems. So 1, 2, 6, and 7, and then unpause it once you have attempted those problems because we're going to try them together. So now let's take a look at number 1. So number 1, I don't have my cheat sheet there. So number 1, we are going to have the number of girls varied inversely as the number of boys and directly as the number of teachers. Okay, so we're saying the girls varied inversely. So number 1, we're going to start with G1 over G2. Because remember, this side does not change. G1 over G2, G1 over G2. And it says it varies inversely to the number of boys. Well, inversely would go like this. So that would be B2 over B1. And directly as the number of teachers, well, directly goes like this, but instead of B1, I would put T1 and T2. And now I'm going to just plug in the information that they give us. They said there are 65 girls, 15 teachers, and 3 boys, and that's all going to be our ones. So 65 girls would be our G1. It says 15 teachers and 3 boys. So 15 teachers would be our T1. And then our 3 boys would be our B1. Now it says how many boys were there. So B2 were there when there were 5 girls. So G2 would be 5, and then teachers would be 100. And it says to work the problem twice. I'm not going to ask you to write the problem twice. This would be sufficient. So now what we're going to do is we're going to cross multiply. So I have 5 times 15, which would be 75x, equals 65 times 3 times 100. Then we're going to divide both sides by 75. So in your calculator, you can do 65 times 3 times 100, then divide that all by 75, which would give you 260 boys. And that would be your result. Now, if you haven't attempted number 2, I want you to pause this video now so you can attempt number 2. So number 2, we have spanners vary jointly as ratchets and mitters. Okay, so for number 2, we have varies jointly. So it's the spanner, so our S1 over S2 varies jointly. We're going to use this equation here. It's varying jointly as ratchets and emitters. So it would be R1 and M1 over R2 and M2. It says here if there are 100 spinners, one with 4 ratchets and 5 emitters. So S1 is going to be 100. And there are 4 ratchets and 5 emitters, so it would be 4 times 5. And then you are solving for how many ratchets, so R2 would go with 20 spanners and 2 emitters. So it would be 20 and then 2. Now when you cross multiply, we have 2 times 100 would be 200x equals 20 times 4 times 5. We're going to divide both sides by 200. So in my calculator, I'm going to do 20 times 4 times 5, and then divide that by 200, which would give me 2, and we were solving for the number of ratchets. And that would be your answer. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look at number 6 and number 7 together. So number 6 says it's new, but it's what we were doing before. So number 6, we have x minus 3y equals 2. Then we have xy equals 4. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to solve this top equation for x. So x would be equal to 3y plus 2. Now we're going to plug that into this equation here. So that would be 3y plus 2 times y equals 4. If you distribute the y and bring the 4 over, I'm going to get 3y squared plus 2y minus 4 equals 0. Now what we can do is we're going to do quadratic formula here. So this would be a, this is my b, and this is my c. It's going to be y is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. So I have negative 2 over 6. Inside my square root, I'm going to have the square root of 4 plus 4 times 3 times 4 would be 48 over 6. So that turns into the square root of 52. And 52 can be simplified to 2 root 13. So I have negative 1/3 plus or minus 2 root 13 over 6, which would simplify to y is equal to negative 1/3 plus or minus the square root of 13 over 3. And that would be your result for what y is equal to. But you're not done yet, because you would then have to solve for what x is equal to. So now you're going to plug that in here. That would be 3 times negative 1/3 plus or minus the square root of 13 over 3 plus 2. Now if you distribute this 3, that would be negative 3 over 3 plus or minus 3 root 13 over 3 plus 2. Now, negative 3 over 3 would just be negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 13 and then plus 2. Well, I can combine this 2 and the negative 1, so I get x is equal to 1 plus or minus the square root of plus or minus the square root of 13, and that would be your result. So notice that there's a square root in both of our answers. That's what makes it a little different than what we were doing before. Now number 7 is something that we have been doing before, but I would like to go over it with you. So hopefully you're paying attention to this video and you will get this problem done as well. So this would be x squared plus y squared equals 4, and then 4x squared minus y squared equals negative 4. Well, look at that. If I add these two equations together, the y squareds are going to cancel out, and I end up with 5x squared is equal to 0, which means that x squared is going to be equal to 0, which means that when I take the square root, x is going to be equal to 0. So now all I need to do is solve for what y is equal to. So I'm going to take this x is equal to 0 and plug it in. So that would be 0 squared plus y squared equals 4. Y squared is equal to 4. When I take the square root, remember, when you take the square root, you get plus or minus. So y would be equal to plus or minus 2. So your answer would be 0, comma, plus or minus 2. And that would be your result. I hope you guys all watch this video, and in the comment section, please place all of your questions for lesson 96A. I hope you guys all have a great weekend. Bye.